Thanks so much. I really genuinely appreciate it. And the beauty of this is that what we're going to be talking about today is getting rid of loose cannons. Loose cannons. You've got loose cannons in your organization. You know who they are. They're the ones with a little bit of swagger in their step. They're the ones who have the capacity, or at least seem to have the capacity, to just basically say all the fancy things that make you nervous, like "Don't worry about a thing. I've got it under control." Things like that just tend to freak me out. So before we get into all the risk management, identification, qualification, before we get into all of that, the first thing we really need to have in hand is risk governance. It's all about governance, and that's what we're going to be talking about today is how can you actually be a player in the whole risk governance thing within your organization. Amazingly, most people are like, thank you. No, I've got enough on my plate. I really don't want to do the risk governance shtick. And let me just suggest to you, that's a bad attitude. You really do need a more positive attitude about the whole risk thing, and you get to do it more effectively when you're the one who helped set the stage for what risk governance is and what it's going to all be about. So as we launch into this too, let me also stress, if you have a question about anything I'm talking about at any given point in time, there is a chat interface in the WebEx. And I would like to encourage you to go ahead and use the chat interface. Send me a message and say, hey, Carl, you just said this, and I'm not sure I understand it. And if I see those comments, by golly, I'll respond to them real time. I will. Now, obviously, those of you who are listening to the recording of this, not going to happen. But for the rest of you, you're lucky because, well, frankly, you're here. And that's where we're going to go. We're going to be talking about the whole loose cannon concept. And it's all about who's in charge. Who's in charge? Is it your boss? Is it you? Well, even if it's the organization's mission and vision, it all gets blown out the window if we have too many loose cannons. Loose cannons are a real problem, and the loose cannon metaphor, or the etymology of the term, actually goes back to our seafaring days, and there was nothing more dangerous on a ship than a cannon that had lost its moorings on deck, because it was then a loose cannon. And a loose cannon had the potential to punch a hole in the side of the ship, even if it wasn't fired, just because it would start rolling, and they weighed so much that they would just roll across the deck and, boom, take out a wall. Loose cannons were a real problem. I'm sorry, loose cannons are a real problem. Loose cannons are frankly quite the challenge, and we're going to be the ones who actually have the ability, if we can get the organization to buy in, to stem the tide of loose cannons. Your boss and your boss's boss and the big cheese, the CEO or whatever title she may have, but the head honchos in your organization, frankly, their words are meaningless if we allow the loose cannon to reign supreme. We can't. We just can't. And we're going to talk about how do you actually rein them in and how these people can ruin our risk governance. There he is. Doesn't look like a person, but he's a loose cannon. And the reason he ruins our risk governance is risk governance says we're willing to take the same level of risk. Not just me, but me and all of my various and sundry players on my team. Whether it's Anil or Anthony, whether it's Amra, Anne-Marie, doesn't really matter. Any one of these players could be my loose cannon, could ruin everything for me. Merrick, Mark, Martin, boom. Any one of them could come along and get rid of my risk governance by virtue of not adhering to or not even understanding what governance is all about. Now, governance, not a term we generally find favorable, because normally governance and government actually tie in, and we are governed. I don't like being governed. Well, normally I don't like being governed. I actually relish being governed when I feel like everybody's following the rules and everybody's playing the same way. playing the same way. It's funny. I was talking last night to a group, and when we were chatting about it, I commented on the fact that people play the Monopoly board game, and I would lay odds that most of you at some point in your lives have played Monopoly or some version thereof. And I want you to think about that. Playing Monopoly, and this is a chance for you to try out the chat interface if you'd like, if you just want to write a 2 or 3 word answer. What happens when you land on free parking? Just go ahead and write that in there. Just put it in the chat interface and hit enter and send it off to me. What happens when you hit free parking and you're playing Monopoly? Don't recall. Cool. Well, I'll go ahead and land you one there, and that is what's supposed to happen according to the Monopoly rule book is nothing. It's supposed to be a moment's respite from the trials of the game. That's what it's supposed to be. But some people are like, oh, you collect all the cash that accrued in the middle. Nowhere in the rule book does it say you accrue cash in the middle of the board. And yet, people do that all the time. They accrue the cash, and whoever lands on free parking, they get to rake it all in. They have their own set of rules. And what's exasperating is, if you've ever had somebody come over to your house for game night, and you've got them coming over to your house, and they have a different set of rules for Monopoly than you do, it all goes out the window. Some people play that when you land on go, not pass go, but when you land on go, you get a bonus check. Other people play you land on go, you get nothing because you didn't pass go. Oh, wow. Just a host of different rules and regs that people have going. Let me go. Just popped down here. And Steve piped in and said, nothing happens. Absolutely nothing happens. That's the good thing. You get the money in the middle, says Terry. Terry's part of that school of thought. Well, what's intriguing about this is that different people have different perceptions, and there's no governance. It's the my house, my roof, my rules kind of thing. Maybe so, but the beauty of it is when we have good risk governance and when you're playing with people who follow the same rules, it's a much more enjoyable game. It's much more entertaining, and it's a lot more fun. And that's a big part of it, is the whole idea here is to make the job tolerable. For risk governance, here are the key elements, the core of what we need, the ABCs, if you will, of what you need to do effective risk governance. And if you are the first person to come up with these things, you rule the day. You wrote the rule book. And these are the things that we're going to talk about in terms of risk governance and setting it up properly within your organization. These are the things that you actually should be looking at kind of in the long-term view. And it starts with definitions. What's a risk? Now, the first is a nice formal one out of a risk guide. And as you look at that, an event with a degree of uncertainty. Yeah, it all sounds very formal. Some people just paint risk as evil. Anything bad that may happen to us. Some people look at challenges as risks, and they're looking in many cases at both sides of the risk equation, threat and opportunity. They're looking at both sides of that. And some people simply see risks as problems. Well, if they're future problems, I might agree with you. If they are problems that are already with you, then they're issues, not risks. Now, you might think that this is a semantics argument. This is just, Carl, you're just getting all wrapped around the axle in a dictionary. Perhaps I am. But words matter, and words mean things. If you're asking people, what risks do we have on the project, it's a whole different ballgame if you're asking them, what evil is afoot on our project, versus asking them, well, what challenges may we face? What problems may we face? What events with a degree of uncertainty, and so on.